Good afternoon. This is Hope Roski with Business, Arts, Events, and more cool stuff. Well, today I am honored to have two military veterans here with me, Darin Marsella and Jim Lovell. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you, Hope.
It's great to have you here. We're here today to talk about a book that is just coming out. It's called Broad Stripes and Bright Stars. And this is a book that actually was collaborated by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Anderson. And Robert Anderson is a neighbor of mine, but also served years in the military, honored veteran, so much to be thankful for his service and for your service as well. The book is basically about stories that have been inspirational, stories that tell about time in the military. And I know that both of you have been collaborators in this book as well and sharing your stories. So, Darin, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about how you got into the military. Let's start with that first, and then what your service has been.
Yeah, great question. You know, I think it started with the Army set that I got when I was like 7 years old. And it was all about, being an Army guy and wanted to check it out. I wasn't ready for college. I was burnt out on school. I'm like, Dad's like, hey, you want to go in for a couple of years and check it out? I'm like, yeah, let's go. So went off to Fort Sill, Oklahoma a couple of years, did artillery, came back home, went to Fresno State. I was never so excited to go to Fresno State. I think I got good grades for the first time. It was awesome. The 9/11 rolled out, and I'm like, what can I do to support? So a good friend of mine, Ryan Metzler, was in the Navy and said, hey, you kind of want to go work with the SEALs? I'm like, yeah, how do I go do that? So that's where the reserve started in 2004, and it's kind of where we ended about a year ago and retired.
So you went basically from Army service and then also were able to transition into Naval service as a SEAL, correct?
Not as a SEAL, as a weapons ordnance tech.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's correct. And then how many tours have you done in your time?
Geez, I think it's over 4 years worth of deployments, and even though being a reserve, so about 4 years.
Well, you know what, blessings to you and your family, because I know that takes a toll, and your service is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, to that point, I just want to say that without my wife, Janine, and my son holding up the fort back home, that's really everything. The spouses is what make it happen. So.
I bet. And Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And tell us a little bit about your military background, if you will.
I went from high school right into boot camp and shipped overseas.
And which branch of the military?
I was in the Navy.
Okay, so we have two Navy guys here with us, so that's fantastic. So when you were overseas, where were you in your tour?
Gosh, my orders first were at Atsugi, Japan, and I was in the aviation. So I would be a month in Atsugi, Japan, I'd be a month in the Philippines, maybe a month in Hawaii, and then back to Japan again, and all over the place.
Wow, so you did it like in one big swoop, and Darin, you were just like in, out, back in, and out. So, and it's great. Again, it just shows that in the military, there are different times for service, and you have to step up when it's your time to serve. What I want to do is come back here into the book of Broad Stripes and Bright Stars and talk a little bit about what you shared in your version of the story. Darin, how did you, when you first heard about it, and what were your thoughts, and how did you formulate what you wanted to write about in the book?
When you came to me, Hope, and the colonel was like, oh boy, I got to write something, so immediately.
Yeah, especially the colonel's coming after you, right?
I've got to write something. I'm back in college. I'm like, oh no. So it took a while, and finally I'm like, hey, I'll just take the notes from that day that are suspended in time of actual notes that I took and just put it in the book. And it was a good day. Because we all have a lot of stories. We have tons of stories.
I'm sure.
But that one was an exact story of that day. It was a multifaceted day of good, mainly good, a good positive story. So that's why I put it in there.
Give us a little taste of basically what your story is about without divulging, because we want people to read what's in here.
So it was a day in the life. I was in Iraq. You're able to make a phone call home. Obviously, I made a phone call because I was heading out that day to make an ordnance run, probably that night, a long trip. And so you make a phone call like, hey, I got to talk to the fam. Talk to my
Right.
wife, got a hold of her. I think she was at a party with my uncles and aunts. Maybe it was Easter. So I got to talk to everybody, hear my son speak on the phone. Boom, popped out, headed on the helo, and we headed out, made our run. Long trip, and I think that one that was in the book. We got struck by lightning, so we popped down
Wow.
in the middle of nowhere in the desert somewhere. It's at night, and had a smoke break. Like everybody take a smoke break till we were clear, jump back, and I think I was dipping Copenhagen at the time. So a water bottle in Copenhagen was life support.
What a combo, right?
For a combo,
Yeah.
and the hydraulic fluids leaking. It's a Chinook, so that was mandatory, leaking all over you, and it was a great experience looking back. Made it back home, went out to the range, I think in the same day, and shot, had fun shooting all the weapons, and then had a barbecue. So it was like from one night to the next molded into, it just flowed into a great barbecue. And that was just one day that was there. So
Right, and that's quite a diversified experience
it
for
was a
you.
diversified experience.
So, Jim, how did your story come about? Why did you select the passage you did?
There are so many divisions, especially of the Navy. You have the submarines and you have aviation, and I was on the USS Duluth, and our job was to pick up the Marines on the beach, take them out to sea several miles so their feet could dry out. They could actually sleep at night. And then within about 2 weeks, we'd drop them back on the beach again. So, I mean, I thought, how close can you get to Vietnam? And I picked up a bolt on our flight deck and threw it, and I hit the sand. So that's pretty close. I need to play baseball.
Right, my goodness. So everybody has had quite the experience. I know mine obviously was a little bit of a different passage, and my father was a Marine, and I was always marched up the stairs to go to bed. I mean, it was like a hup 2, 3, 4, and it was always yes sir, no sir. Even if I said yes, it was yes what, yes sir, and it was just very much in that order. And my father, on the way to school, would teach me military songs, and so I would sing things like, the Marine Corps hymn and about how the raggedy-ass Marines were on parade. And I turned that into my show and tell experience. And with that, I got a phone call home. I was in trouble for singing that in school about the raggedy-ass Marines being on parade. And so my father and I both kind of got a little bit in trouble, but at the same time, there was a little bit of a chuckle there. With that, that stayed with me. I would sing, but I didn't understand what I was singing about. I didn't understand the meaning. Today, obviously, knowing the service of our military and good men and women like yourselves, it has way more significance. And later in life, as a personal fitness trainer, I met an ex-Marine. His name was Jack Shutt, and a good man. And what tied us together were those songs that my dad raised me on. Those are the things that really made a difference. And when he found out he had cancer, it made an impact, because when he was about to be read his rights, we had one more Marine Corps hymn before he passed, and that has stayed with me forever. So although I did not per se serve in the military, these stories are so diverse in how anybody who is in touch with somebody at a military level, it just made such a difference. In closing, let's talk about the proceeds of the book. Darin, would you like to touch base on that a little bit?
Absolutely, great opportunity for the proceeds for PTSD. There's a lot going on. What happens is you get off deployment and you're trained. They train us really well, obviously, but they don't train you when you get home. So how do you unravel that? How do you get home and you're on this mindset, and it's everyone's doing something different. So like, for example, real quick, what happened on the subway is that guy was trained enough to be dangerous, but he wasn't trained enough to be effective he had a chokehold, but you can't go around doing that, just like a CCW license.
Right.
So anyways, PTSD, it's a great cause. They're doing studies on psilocybin which is the psychedelics to slow down your mind so that you can stop and process that instead
Sure.
of your mind racing around and with anxiety. So it helps. That's a great study, and that's what we're looking for.
You know, and we sit here and we're talking about this, you know, somewhat, you know, at a business level, matter of factly, but you gentlemen have been through it. And that's, you know, such a significant part. And nobody will ever know that walk except for you both. Jim, what was it like for you once you came back after your tour? Because, you know, there's years difference between like you and Darin right here. So what was it like for you to return?
If this interview was 30 years ago, I would not be sitting here. My daughter didn't even know I was in the Navy until she was like 12 years old. Because when I came back, I was a psycho baby killer. And even my friends that I went to high school with would spit in my face and they wouldn't even talk to me. When you get out, it's just like, you're out.
And there's no support. And I think
There
that's...
is now.
There is now, but back then you didn't have that support, correct? Like you do
Right.
today.
Right.
And that's why the sales of this book, it's $25. It is going towards mental health, the PTSD for our military. And this is men and women, anybody who has served will understand the importance of this. And I think it's just paramount that folks, if you are interested in purchasing this book, there are ways that you can do this. You can. What are some of the ways that you would suggest? You have a website here, Darin. Would you like to tell us about that?
Right. So honoring our military veterans, it's a nonprofit. What we do is we try to fill the gap. So you can donate through a number of ways. Get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to direct you towards this book so that it's funneled exactly to PTSD. But again, you can reach us on our website and reach out to us and let us know what you'd like to do, and we'll help fill that gap.
And maybe even through that as well, if you're interested in purchasing a book, it's $25. And just once again, so you know that this is not the way that this was put up was not as a 501c3. So we want anything going as proceeds beyond the cost of this book's creation to go right into the hands of our good men and women of this country who have served. I would like to take the time to thank both of you gentlemen coming in, Darin Marsella, Jim Lovell, for talking to us about your time in the military and the importance of what this book means. And there are so many more stories in here. Matter of fact, I have a Zoom call with Tamsin Munger coming up next. She will talk a little bit about the person whose name happened to be Lucky and his service in the military. We will be taking a break, and we will be back with you in a few moments. This is Hope Roski with Business, Arts, Events, and more cool stuff.